Hello and welcome to Design Alpha. Today I'll be going over the basics on how to use the Enscape plugin by going over the essential tools that you'll most often use. In this video I'll be showcasing this plugin through SketchUp, however it can be used in almost any other digital modeling program on the market. To keep this tutorial as short as possible, I'll be mostly focusing on how to render images and will make a more in-depth video on how to create animations and more in-depth discussions about the different tools later on. Enscape is one of my favorite rendering programs out there, as it is a real-time renderer, fast, easy to use, and very user-friendly. Therefore, mastering this software can act as a powerful tool to have in your skill set for almost any field of design. Let's get started. So the tools that are going to be related to Enscape are going to be located in this taskbar up here, from this orange symbol all the way to that person symbol down there. Now, the first one you're going to want to click on is the Enscape logo here, which says Start Enscape. Clicking on that will begin to start the plugin, and it will load in a couple of seconds. Alright, now that it's loaded, you can see that it's in a larger format like this. However, usually I prefer to have my Enscape in a smaller window like this, but as you would see, and the reason I would do this is because having it in full screen mode reduces the frame rate quite drastically. So having it in a smaller window like this allows for a much more fluid and easy experience. However, for this tutorial, it'd be a bit difficult because, as you see, if I try doing anything to SketchUp, it makes it disappear. Therefore, for this purpose, I'm going to have it just on the side here as I work with SketchUp on the left. And for that, I will have to also bring the taskbar down here. To work with Enscape without having it disappear when clicking on SketchUp, you are almost definitely going to need multiple monitors. I recommend having at least 2 or even 3 when trying to do anything with design. This will allow you to move this viewport over here to a different screen, allowing you to then continue working on SketchUp without having Enscape disappear in the background. So that's the first icon out of the way. The next one is going to be live updates. Now, live updates is basically, you can see it's already highlighted blue here, which means it is active. And what that means is that any changes I make to the model at this point in time are going to be live updates in Enscape. Now, if I had that off, for example, and I try doing that again, Enscape is not showing me what is happening in real time with SketchUp. And that will only pop up if I turn it back on. So you would want to keep that on for now. The one after, which I kind of showcased just briefly, was Synchronize Views. You want to also have this turned on at almost all times because it shows you a mirrored image of what you're seeing in SketchUp in Enscape. That shows you not just the viewport that you can see in SketchUp, but also all movements you make are going to be mirrored 100%. The icon after that is going to be the Enscape Objects. This is mainly used for lighting, as you can see, with the sphere, spotlight, line light, rectangle, and disk. And any one of these can be used by simply just clicking on it, and the tools, the actual mechanisms to try and get it to line up in the right points is a bit confusing, but you can get your head around it quite quickly. As you can see, it hasn't showed up in the right side, and that's because of the lighting conditions of this being in daytime and the actual luminosity being quite low. As you can see, you can change the luminosity, therefore, basically you can change the brightness of it. And in this particular example, with the rectangle tool, there's also width, length, and this remains constant with the other different lighting tools, each one of them having their own separate settings. And I'll have a tutorial going into more in depth about how to use lighting later on in my videos. The next icon after this is going to be the asset library. This is going to be all of Enscape's pre-modeled objects that you can use in your model, whether that be anything from people, animals, different vegetation, vehicles, mainly used to create some more realism into your models by adding a bit of detail and adding some more interest. It is as simple as clicking onto whatever model you want it to be and making sure you double click it, and Enscape will give you a preview of where you want that model to be, and then you simply just click anywhere, and you can do this multiple times, so you can keep on clicking, but if you're happy with it, you just press escape. And if I minimize this, you can see that I now have my model in. If you zoom in quite closely, the model is not amazing. I think it's quite good for what it is. It's mainly best used for, as you can see, looking far away. The next icon after the asset library is going to be the material library over here. Opening this will show you a list of Enscape's pre-built materials that you can use in your model. Now, for example, if I was to click on any one of these, for example, this one here, brick number 7, all you have to do is click on it and then press import selection down here. It will load into, you'll see it load into your SketchUp under your materials library, and you can either click your paint bucket, which is going to be located up there, or much simpler, just click onto the material itself. Once you close this, you have to fully close that bar there. Then you can be free to click on the material, click onto whatever part of your model you want, and you can see the material showing up in Enscape there. And it has its own pre-built bump map, its own pre-built reflections to make it look as realistic as possible. However, if you wanted to change any of those settings, you would simply click onto the next icon, Enscape Material Editor. In here, you can see a list of all the materials you have loaded in, and in this example, we got brick number 7, and it has everything from the texture itself, the height map, reflections, and you can change any one of these to your own liking to create whatever material your heart desires. So this can be anything from changing the tint color of it or the displacement. Moving the metallic bit to make it more shiny, and changing the specular as well. With different materials, this may have a lot more options. With this brick material, it seems like there's only these 3 main categories here. However, I've seen other materials with more settings down below. And the last 5 icons you have here are mainly just general settings, general account management. There is this upload management here, which is mainly used for sharing projects amongst different designers or clients perhaps. And however, for my users, I almost never use it. It has no real use for me. So I'll just go ahead and close that. And the last ones are mainly accounts and general settings. Here you have the settings which are mainly focusing on your hardware features, so the different drivers you're using, networking, which is to do with more your account, and the preferences, your language, and more again to do with your graphics driver and things like that. And feedback about the account you're using and the user account itself. Moving into the Enscape plugin itself, before I touch on any of the icons located at the top, I'll go over briefly the movement controls through the keyboard and the mouse bindings. So to begin with, you have left, right, forward and back, which is used with WASD. D, if you need to click on the window itself, D to move right, A to move left, S to move back, and W to move forward. And as you can see, I don't know why, but it is quite slow when you're using those key bindings on the keyboard in Enscape. So if I'm not, obviously an alternative is to just be moving around quickly in SketchUp. However, if you were just using Enscape, I would mainly focus on the mouse buttons. So firstly, to turn the camera while still remaining in place, as if you were turning your head, you want to use the left mouse button, just like this. To move your entire camera around the model, you would use the right mouse button. You can also mimic the WASD movement controls with the scroll wheel button, such as this, moving your mouse around your mouse pad. But as I stated, the movements in Enscape are not the best, mainly used for moving your camera around. Scroll wheel will also, as you could expect, allow you to move forward and backwards. However, I mainly prefer to just use the SketchUp movements, as I find them a lot more fluid, a lot more quick and snappy. Regarding the icons, I will be touching on the bare essentials that you will need to use in Enscape to be able to mainly create rendered images. As I said in the introduction, I'll go through more in-depth tutorials about how to create animations and what some of the other tools do. However, you will be primarily focusing on what I'm about to show here. So the first one you would want to touch on is view management. Now, this is going to be focusing on if you have scenes. This is especially useful if you were using a program such as Revit, for example, which I've done in the past. However, with SketchUp, you can see I've created some scenes beforehand, and this allows you to basically just activate these scenes through Enscape without having to touch SketchUp at all. So you can see there's scene 1 here, and scene 2, and scene 3. The next after that is going to be this tree here, which is the asset library. Again, I already showed this in SketchUp. However, this is just another way you can access it through Enscape. And it has everything just like as before. Perhaps you would want to use this if it makes it a bit quicker. It also has options of creating mass model placement. So if you wanted to create a whole forest of trees, there is this icon here. It shows you the density, how much, like which objects you want to choose. You would have to bring it out a bit further to be able to see the full settings here. There's that option there. And there's also single asset placement. You can rotate assets, select them, translate them. It gives you a bit more freedom and options than it does with the SketchUp asset library. The next thing I'll be talking about is site context. This mode here is quite rarely used. However, it gives you the ability to choose any place in the world you want to have your model placed. So if you were doing a architectural design that was specifically located somewhere in your home city, for example, you can go ahead and drag this icon here to move it around where your site would be located, or to physically type in an address and then press enter, and it will take you to wherever you type in. For example, New York. And there you go. And it takes a second for the maps to load in, but there it is there. And what this does is it essentially maps out what the sun path, the sun angle is at the specific time of day you make it in your model to make it as realistic as possible. However, in my past I have found that it is not always 100% accurate, therefore there are other ways to get this same effect through different methods, which I will go in more detail in the future, but the option is there if you would like to use it. You can also turn on building landmarks, street and sidewalks, and even the typography to get it as accurate as possible. However, not all places in the world would have this stuff mapped out 100%. It's mainly for as shown here, are some of the most popular cities in the world. Next, after the site context, is arguably the most important button here, which is the screenshot. Now, this is basically just to take a screenshot of whatever you're looking at to fully render an image. All it takes is to click on that button right there with your left mouse button, and it will start having a loading bar, and you simply save it to wherever folder you want within your file manager. You can also alternatively choose batch rendering, and if I was to click on that, you would highlight the different scenes that we talked about before, and this would obviously take a longer time, however allows you to produce different scenes, different shots, different lighting, all at the same time. So you could click on batch rendering, click render images, and then walk away and do whatever you want, and this would be running on in the background, opposed to you having to click it every single time for each different scene, and you would have to restart the process of sitting down and changing the scene and then doing it all over again. The next few icons I'd like to talk about, I'm going to go through quite quickly as a rapid fire segment. The first I was to talk about is basically this minimap here. If I click on here, it gives a very rough depiction of where your person is in relation to the rest of the site. So if I was to get closer to here, as you can see now, you see where the icon is where the camera is, and these white squares are obviously the buildings. Now, the good thing about this is that it shows you a top-down kind of a bird's eye view, and if I was to click anywhere within these buildings, it takes me right into them. And this can work on basically any part of your site, and it gives you a quicker way to just access different parts of your model, whether you want to be inside, outside. It gives you more flexibility and more understanding of the site context from a floor plan view from above or a site context. Then there is the navigation mode, which is, if I close, I'll have to go here and close the matching viewports so that I can access this one here, the navigation mode. And this is quite simple. We are currently in flying mode, which allows you to float in the air and move up, down, things like that. However, if you wanted something more realistic, perhaps for an animation, if I go ahead and close this, you can click on walking mode, which will drop you, as you can see, right down to the ground level of your model, to which you can walk around as if you were a person within your model. And it has the camera located at the average eye level of a human being. Now, the only catch to this is that you must have a floor to your model, even if it's just a 2D plane, such as this. Because without that floor, if you click on walking mode, and before you saw how I dropped, it will just go straight through and just keep falling until it eventually stops somewhere in the abyss over here. Then there is the different perspectives that you could click on. So this, I believe the actual name of this is projection mode. So we're currently in perspective, which is pretty much what you would want to use almost 100% of the time. And if I was to match up the views, it is the most, in my opinion, the most realistic, the most accurate depiction of what your model would look like. The only downside about perspectives is if you want to get, this is common knowledge, to get more realistic renderings is to have vertical lines shown here parallel with the vertical borders of your screen. So if I was to line it up right there and bring my camera down, that would be a realistic shot there. However, if I was to slightly bend my camera like this, and you can see that the vertical part, the vertical edge of this structure is not aligning with the vertical nature of my screen. That is a subtle detail that just brings away from the realistic nature of your renders and just makes it seem a little bit more fake. So if you wanted to mitigate that, you can change it to 2-point perspective, which automatically locks in the vertical lines of your screen to make them 100% straight. However, the downside is that the second you start to move either too far down or too far up, it drastically warps your model to unrealistic proportions because it's trying to match that vertical nature of your screen. So that is not often used. I usually just stick with perspective, but another quite useful one is actually in the orthogonal view, which, as you can see here, you have to set it up on a certain angle so you can actually see your model. However, it basically follows the orthogonal nature of having parallel lines with each other. If you were to do a technical render, so if you were to render something which isn't supposed to be in perspective, but in an orthogonal nature like this, that's the setting you would switch it to. It also removes the ground to make it white, to make it more technical and more precise. The last thing I would like to go through is the visual settings panel, which is located here. As you can see, these settings are very in-depth, very detailed. Therefore, I'm just going to briefly go over where you can find these settings, and we'll most likely go through them later on my channel in more detail to show how to achieve more realistic renders, mainly using these settings, as these settings are very important to get the certain look you're aiming for within your renders. However, I'm just going to go over the general understanding of everything you need to know as you're just starting off. So in the style section, you have none, which is the normal basic Enscape view, showing everything to do with shading, materials, the most realistic viewport there. White and polystyrol are very similar, just showing your model in a blank white canvas, almost as it's shown here. And lastly is light view, which is a makeshift thermal imaging of your model, not necessarily being 100% accurate, as it is just measuring where the sun is hitting different objects and the shadows they are casting. However, it is quite useful to get a general understanding of the thermal dynamics of your model. Moving into imaging, there is auto contrast, which you would very rarely want to have kept on, as it can create unrealistic renders, especially to do with midday exterior shots. I almost always keep it off and manually change whatever contrast I would like for this particular scene. However, there have been some cases where having auto contrast on and trying to change the time of day will be beneficial, but it is quite rare, so I always try and keep it off. Then there are effects mainly to do with rendering, such as motion blur, lens flare, which does apply to the still renders, bloom, vignette, chromatic aberration, and so on. In atmosphere, there is examples such as fog, which can be used to either be literal fog or to get different aspects within your whatever you're trying to achieve within your render. You can use fog in relation with height to, for example, get God rays through windows in interior shots and other things like that. Then, as clearly shown, illumination and wind intensity, which is a useful tool to have mainly in animations, obviously, as in stills you won't see any wind moving. However, changing this, if you had trees or even water, I believe, the wind moves these animated models because they're not just still models, the leaves actually blow within the wind, and it adds a great deal of realism to your rendering animations. Second last is the sky, and this is most useful to get a HDRI in your model. And to do that, you simply want to go into Skybox here and here is where you would load in a specific HDRI that you've saved onto your computer. Then you can rotate it to wherever you would like, or alternatively, if you simply just want a white background for perhaps just a white card render, you just turn that on right there. Lastly is the output, focusing primarily on the resolution of your render. You have mainly, you would focus on either HD, Full HD, or Ultra HD, depending on how strong your computer is. I keep mine on Full HD and it completes it with relative ease. Alternatively, you can click on Custom and physically change the aspect ratio of your render depending on your monitor scale and proportions, and how the image will be produced in the final copy. There is also some settings to do with the video quality, such as frame rate, compression quality, and lastly panorama, the resolution, low, normal, and high. But with all that out of the way, those are the main icons that you will be needing to use when you're just starting Enscape. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, consider liking it and subscribing to my channel for more design related tutorials posted regularly. Stick around for more exciting features coming soon to Design Alpha.